Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we break down the best productivity books that can drive change in your work and personal life. I'm your host, Andrew, and today we're diving into James Clear's groundbreaking book, Atomic Habits. There's one idea in particular from this book that completely changed my perspective on habit formation. And it's a concept that your habits are actually a reflection of your identity. And this is the part people so often get wrong about habits. We say, I want to run a marathon or I want to write a book. But Clear suggests flipping this around and instead of focusing on the outcome, focus on becoming the type of person who would naturally achieve that outcome. So rather than saying, I want to read more books, you start thinking, I'm becoming a reader. And this subtle shift changes everything about how you approach daily choices and in creating lasting habits. And speaking of fascinating perspectives on this book, I've got David and Simone here today to unpack all the actionable insights from Atomic Habits. You won't want to miss this episode. So if you want to get some extreme value from James Clear's Atomic Habits, if you want to know what all the fuss about this book is about, let's get started. Take it away, guys. Tell me about Atomic Habits.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are talking all about Atomic Habits by James Clear and how to get the most out of this book. We've got summaries and reviews, even some highlighted passages ready to go.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we can really help you guys build better habits. And speaking of building better habits, I actually tried out a new morning routine based on this book.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, I am now waking up before my alarm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. But before I give away all my secrets, I want to bring in our expert to kind of give us like a grand tour of what makes Atomic Habits so impactful. So really, what is it about this book that makes it stand out?
Yeah. You know what I find really helpful about Atomic Habits is that it really breaks down habit building into a science. It's not just about willpower, it really emphasizes that tiny changes done consistently create a ripple effect over time.
Yeah, it's not about some crazy overnight transformation. It's about harnessing those atomic habits, like James Clear calls them.
Exactly. And I think one of the most powerful things that I took away from it is this concept of focusing on your system, the process, rather than just obsessing over the end goal.
Right. It's like you don't win a basketball game just by staring at the scoreboard.
Right.
You have to actually play the game well.
Yeah.
Focus on each play.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. And Clear uses a really similar one in the book. He really emphasizes that your system, your daily habits, are what ultimately lead to those big wins. It's like setting up all those dominoes perfectly so they all fall in place.
Oh, and speaking of dominoes, that reminds me of another key point from Atomic Habits, this whole idea of identity-based habits.
Absolutely. This is where it gets really interesting. James Clear argues that our habits actually shape our identity and vice versa.
Okay, so here's where I want to bring in my own little personal anecdote. Because I used to be like a notorious snooze button hitter. I'm talking 5 times minimum every morning.
Yeah.
Like I would just hit that snooze button over and over. But reading Atomic Habits really made me realize it wasn't even about willpower. It was about how I saw myself. I was telling myself, I'm not a morning person.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of flip the script. And I started saying, I am an early riser. And guess what? I actually started getting up earlier naturally. It's wild how changing your self-perception can actually change your behavior.
That is amazing. And that is a fantastic example of how powerful identity-based habits can be. When you start believing new things about yourself, even small wins can reinforce that desired identity, leading to lasting change.
Totally. It's like each time you stick to that habit, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you want to become. And those votes, they add up over time.
Exactly. And to help us put this into practice, James Clear provides this really practical framework with his 4 laws of behavior change. And I think that this is where the book really shines in terms of offering like actionable advice.
Okay, so let's break down these laws. So the first one is make it obvious. And this one really clicked for me. And I actually implemented one of the techniques that Clear talks about, this whole idea of habit stacking.
Oh, habit stacking is brilliant. It's all about linking a new habit to an existing one.
Right. Like I always make coffee in the morning. So I actually put my vitamins right next to the coffee maker. And now it's automatic. Like I grab the coffee, I grab the vitamins, boom, habit formed.
It's such a simple tweak, but incredibly effective. And Atomic Habits is full of these kinds of practical tips and strategies that make habit change feel less daunting and more achievable.
So we've got make it obvious. What's next?
The second law is make it attractive. This is where we tap into our brain's reward system, making the desired habit something we actually look forward to.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? I mean, some habits, let's be honest, they just aren't that exciting.
Right. Well, Atomic Habits suggests this technique called temptation bundling. So you pair something you want to do with something you need to do. So, for example, if you love watching a particular show, you only allow yourself to watch it while exercising.
Oh, that's sneaky. I love that.
Really?
Tricking your brain into craving that healthy habit. Okay, what about the next law?
The third law is make it easy. And this is all about reducing friction, making the habit as effortless as possible.
Yeah, that's so important. I think sometimes even when we're really motivated to do something, it can just feel too hard.
Exactly. So James Clear suggests starting with a really simplified version of the habit, something you can do in 2 minutes or less. He calls this the 2-minute rule.
Oh, the 2-minute rule. That's
Yeah.
a game changer. So like instead of aiming for a 30-minute workout, you just start with 2 minutes of stretching. And a lot of times that 2 minutes snowballs into more.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth law is make it satisfying. This is all about rewarding ourselves, making the habit enjoyable so we're more likely to stick with it.
And this is where habit tracking comes in, right?
Exactly. The book talks about using a habit tracker to visually measure your progress. It's surprisingly motivating to check off a box or see a streak on a calendar. And Clear even mentions this thing called the Seinfeld strategy, which is basically don't break the chain.
I love that. It's like giving yourself a little gold star for every day that you stick to the habit. It sounds silly, but those little visual reminders can be super powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. We've talked about the power of tiny habits, focusing on systems instead of goals, identity shifts, and now the 4 laws of behavior change. But there's still so much more to unpack from Atomic Habits, so stay with us as we continue to dive into the strategies and insights from James Clear's incredible book on habit formation.
It's a good one.
It is a good one.
You know, one of the things I really appreciate about Atomic Habits is how much it emphasizes playing the long game with habit formation. It's not about like these instant results, but rather that consistent effort over time.
Right. That is so key. It's like we live in this culture of, I want it all and I want it now, but real change takes time.
Exactly. And James Clear actually makes this really great comparison to financial investments. So just like those compound over time, so do our habits. So like small changes today can actually lead to significant gains down the line.
It's like planting a tree. The best time to do it was 20 years ago, but the second best time is today.
I love that. And speaking of time, Atomic Habits also give some really practical advice for when we inevitably face setbacks, because, you know, we all slip up. It's human nature.
Oh, totally. And I think that's what I appreciate about this book, is that it's realistic. It doesn't pretend like we're going to be these perfect robots, you know?
Right. And one strategy Clear suggests is this idea of never missing twice. So if you miss a day, no big deal. Just make sure you get back on track immediately. So it's about consistency, not perfection.
Yeah. So it's not about beating ourselves up for that slip up. It's about getting back on that horse as quickly as possible.
Precisely. And that's where accountability can be incredibly helpful. So having a friend or a coach or even like an online community can make a huge difference.
Oh, for sure. Just knowing someone else is kind of cheering you on,
Yeah.
or even just like aware of your goal can make it way harder to give up. It's like built-in motivation.
Yeah, and speaking of motivation, there's this really fascinating concept in Atomic Habits called the Goldilocks rule.
Ooh, I remember this one. Tell me more.
Are you sick of not being able to create habits that stick? Well, meet Atoms, the habit tracking app from the team behind Atomic Habits that actually makes building good habits that stick. And that's really the remarkable thing about Atomic Habits. No endless features you'll never use, no complicated charts, just the own core tools that James Clear used to write his best-selling book and build his own habits. You can track up to 3 habits for free with the app. It's available on Android and iOS. I love how Adam sends me a simple daily reminder. Did you do your 1% better today? Because that's what it's all about. Tiny changes, remarkable results. You can try Atoms for free for 30 days and see why over 100,000 people are building better habits, one atomic change at a time. Check out the link for the description. Now, back to the show.
Essentially, Goldilocks rule states that we're most motivated when we're working on tasks that are just the right level of difficulty. Not too easy, not too hard.
Right, like finding that sweet spot where you're challenged enough to stay engaged, but not so overwhelmed that you want to quit. Like my Goldilocks rule for exercise used to be like going for a run, which I dreaded. Now it's a dance class. Super challenging, but fun.
That's a perfect example. So Atomic Habits encourages us to find ways to kind of keep our habits engaging over time
Yeah.
and to constantly tweak and refine them so that we can hit that Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, it's almost like leveling up in a video game.
Right.
As you get better, you need more challenging tasks to stay motivated
Yeah.
and keep growing.
Exactly. Now, here's something that might surprise you. James Clear actually also talks about the potential downside of creating good habits.
Wait, a downside to good habits. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, it's not that good habits are bad in themselves, but rather that once they become automatic, we can actually stop paying attention. We can kind of get complacent.
Okay, I see what you mean. So, like, I might have this amazing morning routine, but if I'm just going through the motions mindlessly, I'm not really getting the full benefit.
Exactly. So Atomic Habits really emphasizes the importance of deliberate practice. So even when a habit is ingrained, we should still be looking for ways to refine it, to improve it, maybe even add a little challenge to keep things fresh.
So it's like even when you've kind of mastered a habit, there's always room for growth. You're never really done, which is kind of exciting, actually.
I think so too. And Atomic Habits offers a ton of strategies for this kind of continuous improvement. Things like habit tracking and reflection, and even experimenting with different approaches.
So it's about taking ownership of your habits, being intentional, and constantly striving for that next level.
Right. And that brings us back to the power of this book. It's not just a list of things to do, it's a framework for thinking about habits. It gives you the tools to analyze your own behavior, identify areas for improvement, and create a system that really works for you.
It's like having a toolbox.
Right.
You've got all the right tools, and Atomic Habits teaches you how to use them to kind of build the life you want, one habit at a time.
That's a great way to put it. And the beauty is you don't have to make these drastic changes overnight. You can start small, build momentum, and trust the process. It's about playing the long game, remember?
Right. Just like those tiny atomic habits, those small wins compound over time,
Yeah.
and they lead to those remarkable results.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious, what's been your biggest aha moment from Atomic Habits so far? Like what's really resonated with you?
That's a tough question, I think, for me. It's been the realization that even tiny improvements, those 1% gains, can have a huge impact over time. And it's given me this sense of hope and possibility, knowing that every small step I take is moving me closer to my goals.
That's fantastic. And for me, it's the emphasis on identity-based habits. It's really shifted my perspective on behavior change. Instead of focusing solely on what I want to achieve, I've started asking myself, who do I want to become?
That's so powerful. It's like your habits are a reflection of who you are and who you believe you can be. It really is amazing how much power our habits have to shape our lives, right?
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive into Atomic Habits, I'm struck by how much James Clear emphasizes the idea of systems thinking.
Oh, yeah. It's not just about those individual habits in isolation. It's about creating a whole environment that supports the changes you want to make.
Right. It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But in this case, it's like you are a product of your systems.
Totally. Like if you want to upgrade your life, you got to upgrade your systems.
Exactly. And Atomic Habits gives us this really great framework for thinking about systems in all these different areas of our lives, from our work to our productivity, to our health, to our relationships.
Yeah, it's not enough to just focus on, okay, I want to drink more water.
Oh,
Or I want to read more. It's about looking at the bigger picture.
yeah.
How do all these habits fit together? How do they support like my overall goals and values?
Precisely. It's about creating a life that's intentionally designed to support the person you want to become.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we figure out what systems to put in place?
Well, one of the most powerful things about systems thinking is it helps us identify the leverage points for change. By understanding how the different parts of our lives are interconnected, we can actually make small adjustments that have a ripple effect.
Right, it's like finding the keystone that holds the whole arch together. Like a tiny shift in one area can create this cascade of positive changes in others.
Exactly. And Atomic Habits encourages us to view our lives as an ongoing experiment, to constantly tweak and refine our systems, to optimize for our desired outcomes.
So it's not about finding the perfect system right away. It's about being willing to experiment, to adjust, to figure out what works best for you.
Right. It's a reminder that personal growth is a journey, not a destination. There's always room for improvement, and even small changes can make a big difference over time.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of systems, the power of tiny changes, the need for consistency. What would you say is like the most important takeaway from Atomic Habits?
For me, it's the reminder that building good habits is really about playing that long game. It's about showing up day after day, even when you don't feel like it, and trusting that those small efforts will compound over time.
Totally. It's about believing that even on the days when you don't see immediate results, you're still laying the foundation for long-term success.
Exactly. And that's why I think Atomic Habits is such a valuable resource. It provides this really practical and inspiring roadmap for anyone who wants to create positive change in their lives.
It's not about willpower or motivation. It's about understanding the science of habit formation and using that knowledge to create a life that's aligned with your goals and values.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Atomic Habits, I want to encourage you to ask yourself, what small changes can you make today to set yourself up for success tomorrow?
Yeah. What tiny habits can you start building today that will compound over time and lead you closer to the life you want to live?
Remember, even a 1% improvement each day can add up to remarkable results in the long run.
So be patient, be persistent, and trust the power of atomic habits to transform your life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into atomic habits. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.